That's where the third pillar of our Iran nuclear policy comes in, the Corker-Cardin Law. As you recall, President Obama refused to submit the Iran deal to Congress as a treaty. He knew full well that Congress would have rejected it. In fact, majorities in both houses of Congress voted against the deal. Among the no votes were leading Democrats like Senators Chuck Schumer, Ben Cardin, and Bob Menendez. Despite President Obama's constitutionally questionable dodge of Congress, the legislative body did attempt to exercise some of its authority with the passage of the Corker-Cardin Law. The law requires that the President make a certification to Congress every 90 days. But importantly, the law asks the President to certify several things, not just one. The first is that Iran has not materially breached the JCPOA. That's the one everyone focuses on. But the Corker-Cardin Law also requires something else, something that is often overlooked. It asks the President to certify the suspension of sanctions against Iran, certify that the suspension of sanctions against Iran is appropriate and proportionate to Iran's nuclear measures, and that it is vital to the national security interests of the United States. So regardless of whether one considers Iran's violations of the JCPOA to have been material, and regardless of whether one considers Iran's flouting of the UN resolution on its ballistic missile technology to be non-nuclear, U.S. law requires the President to also look at whether the Iran deal is appropriate, proportionate, and in our national security interests. Corker-Cardin asks us to put together the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. Under its structure, we must consider not just the Iranian regime's technical violations of the JCPOA, but also its violations of Resolution 2231 and its long history of aggression. We must consider the regime's repeated demonstrated hostility towards the United States. We must consider its history of deception about its nuclear program. We must consider its ongoing development of ballistic missile technology. And we must consider the day when the terms of the JCPOA sunset. That's a day when Iran's military may very well already have the missile technology to send a nuclear warhead to the United States, a technology that North Korea only recently developed. In short, we must consider the whole picture, not simply whether Iran has exceeded the JCPOA's limit on uranium enrichment. We must consider the whole jigsaw puzzle, not just one of its pieces. That's the judgment President Trump will have to make in October. And if the President does not certify Iranian compliance, the Corker-Cardin Law also tells us what happens next. What happens next is significantly in Congress's hands. This is critically important and almost completely overlooked. If the President chooses not to certify Iranian compliance, that does not mean the United States is withdrawing from the JCPOA. Withdrawal from the agreement is governed by the terms of the JCPOA. The Corker-Cardin Law governs the relationship between the President and Congress. If the President finds that he cannot certify Iranian compliance, it would signal one or more of the following messages to Congress. Either the administration believes Iran is in violation of the deal, or the lifting of sanctions against Iran is not appropriate and proportional to the regime's behavior, or the lifting of sanctions is not in the U.S. national security interest. Under the law, Congress then has 60 days to consider whether to reimpose sanctions on Iran. During that time, Congress could take the opportunity to debate Iran's support for terrorism, its past nuclear activity, and its massive human rights violations, all of which are called for in the Corker-Cardin. Congress could debate whether the nuclear deal is in fact too big to fail. We should welcome a debate over whether the JCPOA is in the U.S. national security interests. The previous administration set up the deal in a way that denied us that honest and serious debate. If the President finds that he cannot in good faith certify Iranian compliance, he would initiate a process whereby we move beyond narrow technicalities and look at the big picture. At issue is our national security interests. It's past time we have an Iran nuclear policy that acknowledges that. Thank you.
Is that if the President Obama had submitted this as a treaty to the Congress, then we would be much more constrained in our ability to walk away. He chose not to do that, understanding that he probably wouldn't get ratification. But if there's anyone to blame for the fact that now Donald Trump can make this decision, it is in fact the previous administration. That was their call.
And it would be interesting to see what the debate in Congress would be like when they have to look at everything, when they have to look at all aspects of Corker-Cardin, when they go and look at that. Do they still agree with the agreement? That would be an interesting debate to see happen.
Have you encouraged the Congress back there in the corner? Wait, just
from the New York Times. Ms. Ambassador, this administration has now thrown the Dreamer and DACA to Congress. It's not a debate Congress wants. It sounds like you want to throw the Iran deal to Congress, which I can tell you right now, even your allies on the Republican side will tell you is not really a debate they want to have right now on Capitol Hill with all the things that are going on. This administration has the power to decide to stay in the deal or get out of the deal. Why this middle path where you decertify and then force Congress to make this hard decision for you instead of making that hard decision yourself? And when I talk to the European allies, they say very clearly that they want this deal to continue. Do you really think that you will be able to persuade them, if you get out of the deal, to create another sanctions regime when their message during the debate was uniformly that they would not do so?
Thank you for the question. First of all, this is not just a middle-of-the-road situation. That's U.S. law. Corker-Cardin is U.S. law. And what it says is the president is obligated to make the decision on whether this is still in the U.S. national interest. What the law says is the president has to re-look at this every 90 days. So that's not us trying to sidestep. That is U.S. law, and that is law that the president has to follow. And in good conscience, for all Americans, we should want the president to honestly reevaluate every 90 days to make sure that if things have changed, we're moving accordingly, and if they haven't, we're not. I get that Congress doesn't want this. This is not an easy situation for anyone. It's not easy for the president. It's not easy for the Security Council. It's not easy for Congress. But our lives are not about being easy. Our lives are about being right. And we have to make sure that every decision we make is right. And I know, yes, I agree with you. The European allies want us to stay in the deal. But how many attacks did I just describe in history has the Iranian regime gone against Americans, our soldiers, our diplomats? The Europeans can't say that. They're now having to deal with that. But again, our job is not to make sure that Europeans are happy with us. Our job is to make sure we're keeping the American public safe. That's a heavy price to pay to just try and stay in a deal. I am not saying this should go to Congress. I'm not saying we should get out of the deal. I'm not saying anything in terms of what should or shouldn't happen. What I am saying is we owe it to ourselves to look at every aspect of this deal and understand that this was a flawed deal, and understand that this flawed deal has negative consequences as well.
Ambassador, you have a tight schedule, and so I'm going to